I got it. Hi, I'm Eli. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a man who gave years of quiet service to a company that thought no one would notice when they erased him. A man who was discarded like a spreadsheet entry, cleared to make room for efficiency. But what happens when the one they erased was the only one keeping the lights on? This isn't just about paperwork, licenses, or job titles. It's about what happens when power ignores the value of quiet competence. They thought he was nobody, but he held the one thing they couldn't operate without: their survival. Daniel Cole wasn't loud. At 39, he was the kind of man who didn't chase attention. He earned quiet respect. For almost a decade, he worked as a field compliance officer at Eastn Utility Systems, a mid-sized energy operations firm tucked outside of Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't flashy, but it kept the lights on for half the state. Daniel wasn't interested in corporate games or networking lunches. He focused on what mattered: inspections, licenses, field protocols, and legal documentation that most people ignored until it was too late. So when HR called him into a restructuring review, Daniel wasn't nervous. He had nothing to hide. But what he didn't expect was to be told his position was redundant. "We appreciate your years of service," the HR rep said, barely making eye contact. "But as part of our efficiency strategy, your role has been identified as one we can consolidate." Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply nodded. "Of course, your severance package will reflect your tenure. You'll receive a summary by email shortly." That was it. 9 years, signed off with a PDF. As he packed his things, the halls he once walked with purpose felt unfamiliar. Some colleagues looked at him with pity. Most avoided him altogether. It was easier that way, but Daniel wasn't angry. He was remembering something no one else did. 3 years ago, Eastn had faced a full state compliance audit, one that nearly shut down their field operations. They were missing a valid operations license. The renewal had been neglected. The window to act was closing. Daniel had been the only employee at the time with a valid federal Class A compliance certification. To keep business running, the executive team made a quick decision: register the license under his name to meet the deadline. They said it was temporary. They never changed it. And now, without ever reviewing the licensing records, they had fired the only person legally authorized to operate their field sites. Daniel didn't smile. Not yet. He simply sat in his car, closed his eyes, and thought, "They called me redundant, but I've been the only one holding the key all along." Daniel didn't call anyone after he left the building. He didn't update his LinkedIn. He didn't even tell his sister what had happened. Instead, he drove home, set his work bag on the kitchen counter, and walked into his study. In the back of the bottom drawer, behind expired passwords and old office keys, was a black flash drive. He plugged it into his laptop. A folder blinked open: field certification, active ops. It was all still there. The documentation proving that Eastn Utility's federal operations license was issued under Daniel Cole's name. Not the company, not a division, just him. 3 years ago, during the audit scramble, they hadn't had a choice. Daniel had completed the updated training modules, passed the emergency recertification exams, and submitted the final application before the midnight deadline. Everyone had called him a hero that week. Emails flooded in with praise, but no one ever checked back. The system had stayed as it was. The license remained tied to Daniel's personal credentials. Legally, Eastn couldn't run its rural pipeline operations without it. And now, Daniel was gone. The next day, he got a call. Unknown number. He let it ring. Then a text came through. "Daniel, this is Greg Miles from Eastn Compliance. Can we speak urgently?" He stared at the name. Greg had barely acknowledged him in the last 6 months. He called back. "Daniel," Greg said, trying to sound calm, "we just had a spot check from the State Energy Commission. They're requesting immediate proof of our operating license, and it appears—" He paused. Daniel let the silence stretch. "It appears the active license is still linked to your federal profile. Is that correct?" "Yes," Daniel said plainly. "Well, obviously we'll need to transfer that back to corporate," Daniel interrupted. "Why?" There was a silence so loud Greg nearly coughed. "Well, you're no longer an employee, and we can't legally." He trailed off. Daniel said nothing. "We're willing to compensate you for the transition. Could we arrange a meeting today?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Greg," he said, his voice flat, Yesterday, I was told I wasn't essential. Greg scrambled. That was a mistake. No, Daniel cut in. It was a decision. Then he hung up. He stared out the window. No anger, no revenge plan, just clarity. They had built a system on someone they thought was invisible. Now that he was gone, they'd feel every inch of that absence. By noon, Daniel had 6 missed calls, 2 from compliance, 3 from HR, 1 from an unfamiliar extension that probably belonged to someone much higher up. He didn't return any of them. Instead, he made a list, not of names, of options. Daniel wasn't out for revenge. He didn't even want his old job back, but he wanted something more powerful, respect, and not just for himself, for every quiet professional who'd ever been told they were just a number. He looked over the license. The renewal window was due in 90 days. Technically, he could cancel it at any time, but he didn't, not yet. At 4:32 p.m., his phone rang again. This time, it was a woman's voice. Mr. Cole, this is Jenna Patel, General Counsel for Eastn Utility Systems. I'm calling to request a meeting regarding the operational license registered under your federal ID COM. Formal, legal. Daniel replied, What exactly do you want to discuss? The document is still active in your name. As of today, the state requires updated proof of authorization for your former job site. Without it, the company risks suspension of operations. Daniel could hear the quiet desperation beneath her professionalism. She continued, We'd like to offer a legal transition. Compensation, of course, whatever you need to make the handover smooth. He waited a few beats, then said, And when you say compensation, you mean a check and a signature? Yes, and your cooperation with a brief affidavit confirming the transfer. Daniel leaned forward. Let me ask you something, Miss Patel. Yes? If I hadn't answered this call, what would you have done? She didn't respond immediately. We would have had to escalate to state-level requests. Daniel smiled, not bitter, just satisfied. Send me a draft of your offer, he said. I'll take a look. And then he did something he hadn't done in years. He called a friend. James, he said, still working in your consulting startup? Yeah, why? I have something, might be useful, especially for clients in compliance trouble. You serious? Daniel chuckled. Very, because now it wasn't just about getting even, it was about getting free. That night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a notepad, a coffee mug, and a copy of the license contract spread open in front of him. He wasn't thinking like an employee anymore. He was thinking like a partner. And Eastn Utility Systems didn't realize yet. They had no leverage. They needed his name to operate. And legally, they had zero claim to it without his explicit cooperation. He circled a paragraph in the license agreement. License ownership is non-transferable without express notarized consent of the certified party. That meant they couldn't just push it back into corporate hands. It had to go through him, and he had no reason to rush. The next morning, Jenna Patel followed up with a formal proposal, $7,500 for license transfer and a non-disclosure agreement. Daniel didn't even blink. He opened a blank email. Subject, RE, license negotiation. Hi Jenna, appreciate the offer. I've reviewed the terms. Unfortunately, the license in question has active market value, well beyond your current proposal. I'm happy to enter formal negotiations, but I'll require a full audit of Eastn's active projects using my credentials, plus a valuation meeting. Regards, Daniel Cole. He hit send and leaned back. It was the first time in years he felt like he wasn't being spoken at. He was speaking back. An hour later, James, his consultant friend, called back. I just ran this by a few of my clients, James said. Turns out, licensing bottlenecks are a nightmare for mid-sized utilities, especially ones tied to a single operator. Daniel smiled. So? You're saying I'm marketable? I'm saying you're gold, man. Think about it. These guys spend millions avoiding shutdowns. If your name is the gatekeeper for field ops, they'll pay to stay open. Daniel opened his notebook. He wrote 3 words, license, leverage, legacy. That night, he slept deeper than he had in weeks, not because he had power, but because, for the first time, he had control. Eastn didn't respond right away. Daniel expected that. They were likely scrambling, talking to legal, compliance, maybe even state regulators, trying to find a workaround, trying to fix a mistake they didn't even realize they'd made until it was too late. But there wasn't one. Every document, every renewal, every authorization stamp from the last 3 years had Daniel Cole's name on it. And unless they wanted to shut down operations across 3 counties, they had to play by his terms. On Thursday morning, Daniel received a second offer, $20,000, plus a clause offering a legacy acknowledgement in the company's internal records. No equity, no role, just a payout and a pat on the back. Daniel didn't reply. He printed the offer, placed it in a folder labeled "Desperate Paperwork," and slid it into his drawer. That same afternoon, James called again. "I've got a contact at Eastn Utility. They're looking for a field compliance consultant with your exact certification." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Easton's competitor?" "Yup, they just lost their own guy to retirement. They'd kill for someone who knows regional infrastructure like you do." Daniel paused. What would happen if Eastn found out I was working with their rival? James laughed. "I think you already know the answer to that." That evening, Daniel took a walk through his neighborhood, not because he was restless, but because he felt strangely still. He passed a local utility truck, one he'd once helped inspect. The guys inside didn't recognize him anymore. That was fine, because the world only remembers you once you stop asking to be remembered. Back home, he sat down and began drafting something new. A proposal, not for Eastn, but for himself. A blueprint for becoming an independent compliance advisor. He'd train others, certify them, even license under his own banner. If Eastn wanted his name, they could license it from his company, and then maybe he'd consider signing. On Monday morning, Daniel received a certified letter. Formal notification of license expiration risk. 45 days remaining, issued by the State Energy Commission. He smiled. Eastn must have finally informed them, trying to initiate a transition. But it was too late for shortcuts now. The license renewal process would need Daniel's active involvement, background checks, and signature on 6 forms, minimum. And the state wasn't about to fast-track a favor. At 10:47 a.m., Jenna Patel emailed again. Her tone had changed. "Daniel, we're entering a time-sensitive window. Please advise your price and expectations to resolve this matter quickly. Our teams are under extreme pressure, and any cooperation would be appreciated." Daniel stared at the screen. This wasn't an offer anymore. It was a plea. He replied an hour later with a single sentence. "My terms have changed. Let's schedule a call." At exactly 3 p.m., he joined the meeting. Greg Miles was there too now, Compliance VP. "We're willing to offer $35,000 and waive your NDA. You can keep all intellectual rights and issue a press statement if you'd like." Daniel said nothing. "Daniel," Greg added, "please understand, our engineers and field operators are under real stress. The audits are happening. We need that license in the system within 30 days. Daniel looked directly into the camera. "I spent 9 years keeping your systems legal. I never asked for recognition, Greg. You called me redundant. I'm simply acting like it now." He ended the call. That night, Daniel registered the domain, colefieldcert.com, and just like that, he stopped being former employee Daniel Cole. He became a brand, a business, a name they couldn't write off. By the end of the week, something strange began happening at Eastn. It wasn't just legal or compliance who knew Daniel's name now. The executive board was talking about him. Whispers of who signed that license. Why didn't anyone check the registry? Why didn't HR verify before terminating him? The CEO, Miranda Tate, reportedly stormed out of a budget meeting when someone mentioned the license bottleneck. Internally, they called it the Daniel problem. Meanwhile, Daniel was building. His website went live, simple, clean, professional. He listed his services, operational compliance review, field certification coaching, legal document consultation, and buried at the bottom, a quiet line of text, previously certified under Eastn Utility Systems, 2014 to 2023. That small line sent shockwaves. By Monday, Daniel received 4 inquiries from regional firms. One even requested a quote for full site license advisory. Back at Eastn, tensions rose. Supervisors were reassigning roles to prepare for potential shutdowns. Field technicians were confused. Some even contacted Daniel privately, asking what was really going on. Daniel didn't reply to all of them. but one message from a former intern stuck with him. "Sir, they're saying you took advantage of the company, but I remember when you worked weekends to pass our last audit. You were never redundant. You were the reason we passed." That message? Daniel saved it, pinned it to his wall. Because it wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. The first headline dropped on Thursday afternoon. Compliance crisis at Eastn Utility Systems. Former employee holds key license. A small regional blog had picked up on Daniel's news site and linked it to a recent public hearing where Easton's name had come up. Daniel hadn't spoken to any reporters. He didn't have to. The truth was baked into the licensing records. Public, searchable, undeniable. Within hours, LinkedIn started buzzing. An ex-Easton sales rep posted a cryptic status. "It's amazing how fast not valuable becomes vital." Daniel didn't like drama. He didn't need it, but he wasn't going to hide either. He updated his profile. Founder, coal field certification compliance specialist, licensing consultant, 9+ years in utility infrastructure. No commentary, no gloating, just facts. Jenna called again. "Daniel, this is getting out of hand. We're starting to look unstable to the public. If investors get wind of this—" "They already have," Daniel said flatly. She exhaled hard. "I'm authorized to offer $50,000 and an advisory role, part-time." No NDA. Daniel paused. The offer was better, respectable even, but something had shifted. "I'm not interested in being an advisor," he said. "I'm already building something that doesn't need a board's permission." And with that, he ended the call. Easton wasn't just in trouble. They were exposed, because when the quiet man you fired becomes the loudest name in your industry's back rooms, that's not redundancy, that's a reckoning. The next email came not from Jenna, not from HR, but from the CEO herself. Subject, "Let's talk." Miranda Tate was known for being sharp, composed, and nearly impossible to reach without 5 layers of assistance. Now she was emailing Daniel directly. "Mr. Cole, I'd like to resolve this matter professionally. Our company made a series of assumptions that I now recognize as mistakes. We'd like to invite you to the table, properly this time. Full-time executive consultant position, $85,000 transition package, equity stake, no restrictions on external projects." Daniel read it twice. No apology. But it was the closest thing to acknowledgement he'd ever received from someone in that building. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a walk. On his route, he passed the Easton Regional Office, the same building where he once worked late to meet deadlines that no one else cared about. Now, the parking lot was half empty. Rumors said some contracts were on hold. Others had walked away. Daniel stood across the street, hands in his pockets. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't even smiling. He was thinking, if I go back, I validate everything they did. If I don't, I change the game entirely. Back home, he opened a new document, title, Licensing for the Next Generation. It was the start of a mentorship program, not just about passing certifications, but teaching young compliance officers how to own their expertise. Because Daniel wasn't just trying to win, he was trying to rebuild the system. One that didn't erase quiet competence. He drafted his reply to Miranda. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm no longer interested in seats at your table. I'm building one of my own, and this time, everyone who was overlooked gets a seat." He hit send. The ripple was now a wave. Daniel launched his mentorship program the following Monday. Within 48 hours, over 70 professionals signed up for the interest list. Some were newly certified, others had decades of experience, but had always been overlooked like he was. The message was simple. Don't wait to be given value. Learn how to prove it and protect it. Meanwhile, Easton was bleeding. Internal sources leaked that they were preparing for a partial operational pause. Their rural sites couldn't pass inspection without the renewed license Daniel controlled. They tried hiring new staff. No one qualified. They tried outsourcing. No one would touch the contract, not while Daniel's name was still at the center of a legal gray zone. Then came the public statement. Easton released a quiet press memo announcing unexpected licensing complications and a transition delay in regional operations. It was corporate speak for, "We made a mistake and now the guy we fired is choking us with it." But Daniel never gloated publicly. He didn't post quotes. He didn't celebrate their stumble. Instead, he recorded a short video for his new platform. I'm not here to burn bridges. I'm here to make sure the next generation never builds one they can be pushed off of. Your expertise matters, even when no one sees it. Learn to guard it, leverage it, and one day, own it. At home, Daniel updated his bio one last time. Founder, Cole Certification Group, from redundancy to relevance. And as the world around him adjusted to his new weight, Daniel didn't feel powerful. He felt quietly whole, because in a system that once dismissed him, he had become the standard they now had to meet. Daniel had just finished a webinar session when a notification popped up. Invitation, North American Utility Leadership Summit. Keynote speaker inquiry sent by the organizing chair of the industry's most respected gathering. Subject line, we'd like your voice to open this year's event. Daniel stared at it for a moment. It wasn't long ago that the same summit didn't even approve his attendance application. Now, they were asking him to lead it. He accepted, but with a condition. My keynote must include a segment on workforce dignity and how quiet professionals hold up collapsing systems. They agreed, because at this point, Daniel Cole's voice was not just valid, it was necessary. The auditorium was filled with executives, engineers, legal teams, compliance officers, people who had once ignored every voice like Daniel's. Now they were taking notes as he spoke. What makes a system fail? Daniel asked on stage. It's not a missing document, it's not a faulty permit, it's when we stop seeing people as the reason systems survive. The room was silent, not out of fear, out of understanding. Afterward, dozens approached him, some thanked him, some apologized. One young man said, "You made me rethink how I treat our compliance team." Daniel shook his hand. Then I've done my job. 2 weeks later, Eastn Utility Systems reached out one last time. But this wasn't legal. This was personal. The new interim CEO sent a message. Daniel, we've dismantled our top-down structure. We're starting a board for ethical operations and want you to chair it, not for PR, for rebuilding what we broke. Daniel didn't answer for 3 days. Then finally he responded, I'll consult. Not for salary, not for power, but to make sure no one ever gets erased again. It wasn't revenge, it was reform. A year later, Cole Certification Group had trained over 300 compliance officers across 5 states. Daniel no longer needed to hold the only license. He helped others get theirs. Eastn was now a client, one of many. Their systems were safer, their culture transformed, because of the man they once fired for being redundant. On a quiet evening, Daniel stood on the deck of his small home, watching the sun drop behind the trees. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, sometimes the system doesn't need a loud revolution. It just needs someone they underestimated to quietly rebuild it. He closed his notebook. His story wasn't about noise, it was about legacy. Some stories don't end with applause, they end in silence, the kind that comes when the system finally sees who it ignored. Daniel Cole was never loud, he never had to be, because when they tried to erase his worth, he didn't shout back. He built something they couldn't replace. His story isn't about revenge, it's about restoration, about turning dismissal into dignity, and becoming the standard, not just the exception. So if you've ever been overlooked, undervalued, or labeled redundant, remember Daniel, and remember, the quiet ones, they don't just survive, they redefine what matters.